I'm here in Bucharest, Romania. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this interview with us.
Thanks for having me. Happy to do it.
As you know, we've so far published with Nemira 3 of your Demon Cycle books, The Painted Man, The Desert Spear, and A Daylight War, which just came out at the end of last year. So we have to be careful about spoilers from the next few books. You've just actually now closed the Demon Cycle with the core, isn't it?
Yeah, we're all done.
You're all done. Okay, we'll talk about, well, let's start from the beginning, shall we? Tell us a little bit about how you got hooked into reading as a child. Were you reading fantasy growing up?
Yeah, I mean, the first book that I ever read that I didn't have to read for school, that I just read for fun, was The Hobbit. And I think that probably set the tone for the rest of my life. I always wonder what it would have been like if I had read Sherlock Holmes or something, you know, Western or something different, but that was what I fell into because my brother had a copy of it. And I think that ever after that, fantasy was what I wanted to read. So I went from there to reading Terry Brooks, and from Terry Brooks I started reading Piers Anthony and Robert Jordan and C.S. Friedman, and so many I read hundreds of fantasy books. I read some other books too, but it was mostly fantasy for my whole life. And I think that certainly set the tone for my work.
That's actually a great coincidence. The Hobbit was one of my favorite books growing up. I just loved it. I used to know by heart the riddles that Gollum asks in the cave. So tell me, what are now your favorite writers and why? Do you have a lot of time to read nowadays?
I mean, lately I don't have as much time to read as I used to. We have a new baby in the house, and so
I saw that. I'm following you on Instagram.
Yeah, it's very hard to sit down with a book when you have a baby in the house. So for the last year especially, I've been listening to audiobooks so that I can still sort of enjoy stories and enjoy reading, but do it when I'm at the gym or do it when I'm walking my other daughter to school or things like that. I really enjoy Naomi Novik. Her most recent book, Uprooted, is just fantastic. It's one of my favorite books.
I also published it in Romania. I love it.
Yeah, it's fabulous, and she just turned in her next one, and because I know her personally, I'm going to get an early copy of it. I'm pretty excited about that. I love Pierce Brown. I've been reading I just finished the Red Rising series, and the new one, Iron Gold, just came out. I started listening to that this week. Fantastic series. But most of my contemporary authors, I read their work and really enjoy it. Brent Weeks, Gail Carriger, Joe Abercrombie, Celia Friedman, Scott Lynch, Kevin Hearn, I'm a big fan of, Sabaa Tahir, and so I try and keep abreast of everything that's going on, and especially if I know an author, I try and read their books just so I can discuss with them. I like to talk shop with other authors whenever I can. So I read as much as I can, but it's certainly gotten harder recently with 2 kids in the house.
Can you tell us what books you have now by your bedside?
Well, actually, because I gave up my office to the baby, my desk is now in my bedroom, so I can show you exactly. So these are the 2 that I'm working on right now. It's The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden.
Okay, yeah.
Catherine is author at Random House, same as me, so I've met her a few times. this book has been getting so much wonderful press, and because she's a friend of mine as well, I decided to read it. And it's just, the writing is just beautiful. It's poetic and just, she's so young, and it's hard to believe that someone so young writes so amazingly well. So I highly recommend picking up Bear and the Nightingale. And the other one that I haven't gotten to yet is The Book of Dust by Philip Pullman. I really enjoyed his original, his Dark Materials books. They were really influential in my own work, and so I'm very excited to get to this as soon as I catch up a little bit. The other books on my nightstand are my own books, because sometimes I like to reread things if I get a story idea and I want to look something up.
But isn't that, I've heard that most writers, when they reread their books, their published books, always get a little nervous, thinking that I could have done this differently, or I could have written this sentence in another way, or do you get that as well?
A little bit, but not too much. I am an obsessive editor. So when I turn in a book, I've read through that entire book several times and made little changes throughout every single time, and sometimes big changes. And usually when I turn in a book, I'm pretty satisfied and comfortable that it was the best thing that I could do, and I don't look back at my books and wish that I'd done anything big differently. I think all of my big decisions were very carefully decided and what I wanted them to be. But there are, especially in the early books, I'll look at individual sentences and say, like, oh, I could have written that better, or like, oh, you know, the way I write now, I would have taken that 10-word sentence and made it 7 words, and it would have flowed better. Or so, like, I do sometimes, or I'll spot like a mistake, like a typo or something. But I'm not really. That doesn't worry me, because I'm still happy with my work and proud of my work, and each book represents where I was at that time in my life. And so I like who I am, and I like where I've gotten, so I don't really regret what I've done in the past.
I've actually, I think you're a very meticulous and very ambitious writer as well, and I think even like your work ethics. I read that you wrote the first book on your mobile phone during the commute in New York City. So I think it must take a lot of devotion to write such a big book on your mobile during your commute in the subway.
Yeah, I had turned this book into an agent, the first draft of the Worded Man, and the agent rejected it. And then I turned in some other books, and he rejected those too. And then he came to me. Wow, the sun is right. You can see it's right on. He told me, he's like, the first book you turned in was the best one, but it needs a lot of work. There's a lot of things you need to fix. You're making some amateur mistakes. And he gave me a book on writing called Writing to Sell. And he said, read this book and go back and fix The Worded Man. And so I read the book, and it gave me a lot of ideas and really sort of flipped a light switch on about where my mistakes were. And so I threw out maybe 60% of the book that I had written, and then needed to write whole sections of the book totally fresh. But I had a day job, and I had a home life and a social life, and I just didn't have a lot of time at my desk to do it. And so what I decided to do is I gave up my reading time on the subway. It took me about 45 minutes to an hour to get from where I lived in Brooklyn to Times Square, which was where I was working at the time. And that's each way. So that's an hour and a half to 2 hours a day that I used to spend reading, and I decided that I would try and write instead. So I had a mobile phone. This was before iPhones, so it was a little Windows phone, and it had like actual buttons for the keys, so you could feel like a click every time you press the button. And I had a little version of Microsoft Word on there, and I would start a new chapter, and I would have just that chapter on the phone, and I would just get on the subway, shove some out of the way so I could get a seat and sit down and write for the entire trip. And I would write about 400 words on the way to work and 400 words on the way home from work. And then I would sit at my desk and copy that back to my main computer and fix all the typos from writing with my thumbs and add another 200 words so that I would be 1,000 words every day. And so I tried to do 1,000 words every day, and I did that for a year. And that was the bulk of the second version of the Word Demand, and then I turned that one in, and that was the one that sold and sort of took off in multiple languages.
So how do you go from that to being published in so many languages, in having so many fans that send you artworks and seeing, you know, like all these incredible editions of your books? How does it feel?
It feels amazing. I'm so fortunate and honored by all of that. I mean, I really, when I had my dreams of being a writer, I never really thought that anyone was going to publish me at all. Mm-hmm. And it was mostly a hobby that I did because I enjoyed it. And I had dreams of being published, but I didn't really think it was going to happen. And then even when it happened, I would have been content if just, I saw my books on the shelf in a bookstore and had a little moment of excitement. I never expected the books to be in 25 languages and sell millions of copies worldwide and make bestseller lists and things. So all of that came as a shock, and the love that I get from my readers is such an honor and so gratifying and overwhelming at times, and it's just it's wonderful, and it just makes me want to work even harder to make sure that I deliver books that are good enough to deserve that. True.
Well, I for one, I think it's your Demon Cycle is one of the most beautifully crafted works of fantasy that I've seen in the past, 10 years. And I read a lot of fantasy, but for me it's your works are very addictive. So every time I see there's a new one out, I have to have it. I have to go inside the house and just lock myself and not go out. I'm right now. You've written 5 books in the cycle. You've passed 3,500 pages, I think. But let's go back to the beginning. What was the start of the story? What was your inspiration for the story of Arlen?
It actually started, I was taking a writing class at New York University, mainly for fun. I was, at the time, I was editing medical journals, which was the only job that I could get with a degree in English literature. And so it was a good job, but it wasn't something that I loved. And so I was writing in my spare time, and I decided to take this night class at New York University about fantasy writing. And my hope had been to come in and sort of work on the book that I was already working on, and the teacher said, no, everything you do has to be new for this class. And we had a homework assignment that was to write the first chapter of a fantasy story. And like I tended to do, I waited until the night before it was due, and then I stayed up all night writing. And I wrote this little short story about a boy named Arlen who could never travel more than a few hours from his farm because he had to be home and behind the wards before nighttime because that was when the demons came out. And it sort of ended with him staring out the window as the demons came out and just feeling very trapped. And that idea always stuck with me, the idea of what's over that hill that he can never get to because it's too far away, what is down the road that he, passed where you can travel in one day. And even as I was working on other books, that was sort of in the back of my head, and I kept having ideas and kept writing them down, and then finally I had to abandon my other writing project and sit down and write this story, and I'm so glad I did.
So this brings me to another question. What comes first, the characters or the world? Because I know the detail that you put into the world building that you do, and even now you say that you are fascinated by the idea of what comes after the next hill. So what was it the world, or was it the development of the character that hooked you to this?
People interested in writing ask this question all the time, but there's no right answer to it. I mean, it's different for everyone, and the real answer is that you need both, and they have to grow together. So I had an idea for this world where demons come out at night, which was very much something that I think that we all sort of feel, you know, when humans in general are scared of the dark and think that there's something hiding in the dark. And so the idea that there's real monsters hiding in the dark is not that hard for everyone to understand, which is, I think, why the books do well in translation, because everybody sort of understands that fear. And I had this character who had wanderlust, who wanted to see the world and couldn't because of this. And so I couldn't tell you which of those two things I made up first. I don't even remember.